You're the White Rabbit.
Yeah,
I am absolutely the White Rabbit.
You know, I wasn't expecting a self-insert with this series, but Addie, you keep finding ways to surprise me, I guess.
We're not your friends.
Not at all. All this stuff you've been making up? Ah! Devil May Cry better be good! It better be good!
So, a few weeks ago, we talked about Netflix's Devil May Cry, which, hey, I appreciate you guys watching that and supporting the video. But as I said in it, I had neglected a few things. And I'll admit, there are points I wish I had brought up or expanded upon. I was going more for speed than anything else since the show had just dropped, and while I do stand by a majority of my points in the video, I do feel like I can flesh them out better and add other things, both positive and negative. Of course, there was one element of the video that I had purposely neglected to talk about in depth, and that would be the main villain of the show, the White Rabbit. Villains on this channel are not a foreign topic. Hell, probably before this video I uploaded a compilation of the JoJo videos, and if you ask anyone about them, you'll know that some of them are very classic and demented characters. And today we'll be looking into the White Rabbit as a villain, his past, his motivations, and whether or not I think he's more style over substance. And with Season 2 already been announced, and apparently coming soon, well, you know what Dante would say?
The price to pay for power?
Hell, as you call it, has always been the true heart of human religion. You can curb the worst of your savageries only through collective fear and hatred of another world. My world.
Before we delve into the past of the Netflix version of the White Rabbit, we need to talk about his original form, that being the Devil May Cry 3 mangas, Code Dante and Code Virgil. Unlike the Netflix version, the White Rabbit here, or Rabbi as he's playfully called, is a full-on demon. His goals and motivations are not fully realized, since for one thing, it feels like there's something missing. And there were rumors of there being a third manga, Code Lady, but there's nothing to confirm that. Anyway, Rabbi's goal was to test both Dante and Virgil with hints of him possibly working for someone else, quite possibly Arkham, the main bad guy for Devil May Cry 3, but that's me speculating again. He is not the worst villain of all time, but one who was mostly more for the plot and to set the stage or the actual Devil May Cry 3's story. In contrast, the White Rabbit in Netflix was once an orphan boy who had a fascination with the story of Alice in Wonderland and making gadgets. One day, near his foster home, I assume, a portal to a demon world of Makai opens up, and being inspired by Lewis Carroll, he saw it as a means to escape the real world. Well, he wasn't wrong in that regard. After being transported to the demon world, the White Rabbit eventually was taken in by kind demons, raised, and learned of the horrid conditions of Makai. Eventually, after seeing part of his family dying in front of him from the terrible conditions of Makai, the White Rabbit would dedicate himself to creating a device that would allow him to discover and open portals to the human world, and as such would start transporting demons to escape from a literal hell. And for a time, it was working, at least until... And that was what spiraled the events for the White Rabbit to begin his plan to break down the walls between the human and demon world, even going so far as to keep his body intact with demon blood transfusion, hiring people to steal the Force Edge, then killing them, causing a stir to get attention of Dark Comp. Yes, literally. Still not over that dumb name. And then the events of the show take place. I will give some credit that it certainly is a fleshed out backstory and does give some level of depth to the character, even more so when you compare him to the original. There's a lot more to talk about, and he does have a clear motivation and characterization. That's not to say the manga version wasn't a character. He was a trickster who was willing to use the underhanded ways to get what he wanted, and is more as being ecstatic and playful, centering on manipulating Dante and observing the Sons of Sparta to gauge their strength. For Netflix, it's obvious he's the main antagonist and the driving element behind the plot of the story. He's supposed to be complex and a pivotal character in it. Of course, does that mean that there is substance there? In the process of writing this script, I found a few clips here and there that would explain the thought process of the White Rabbit. This is going to be a bit of a longer clip, so if you're on your draw tablets listening to this, you don't need to look up.
So I was born in India, in Calcutta, which if you know anything about Calcutta, if you look it up, it's a lot of just rampant poverty everywhere. And this is the environment I grew up in. There was just, it was just so overwhelming, right? Because you're just kind of, anytime you go anywhere, you look out the car window and you just see kids that look like you, but they're like living in the streets. And it's so overwhelming, there's nothing anyone can do. And all I did as a kid is I asked, I'm like, why are there so many poor people? And like, no one gave me an answer. And it like really bothered me. And then as I, got to leave India and come to America, live out my dream, I kept realizing like, oh my God, I had this paralyzing guilt and I don't know where it's from. And then it became clear. It's like, oh, it's survivor's guilt. You know, you were born in the right side. You were the part of the .000, you know, whatever. You were just so lucky you won the lottery. You got to leave.
We will come back to this point later, but I want you guys to keep this thought process in the back of your brain. How Adi Shankar made a parallel to his own experiences and translated them to the show. It's why this line,
You're the White Rabbit.
I am absolutely the White Rabbit.
makes sense. It's to establish parallels between Adi's own survivor guilt and the White Rabbit's drama-driven vengeance, framing it as a personal connection to the character's story of being a hurt kid. Cards on the table. There's nothing wrong with this mindset. Countless times, people are able to find personal connections to villains for a plethora of reasons. And while it's interesting to read too much into this, because let me tell you, as a fan of Senator Armstrong, boy do I have some fun accusations about me.
Fuck with this, Senator!
So long as you don't endorse the horrible actions or have their one-to-one mindset, there's nothing wrong with having a personal connection to a villainous character. The real point to make here is to establish the idea that Adi has for the White Rabbit, and even more so when you consider his backstory, which was the point of the video I showed.
You know, that didn't really reflect my experience of life, where I found that everyone is the hero of their own story. Everyone, even the villain. The villain has a story going on in their head in which they are the hero, and they are sometimes a victim, sometimes not, whatever, but they are the hero. And I'm like, why don't these blockbusters ever kind of explore that? And I didn't want you to immediately dive in and go, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the magic trick. We are now going to find out about the backstory of the White Rabbit and make you care.
This isn't a sentiment I disagree with. Most villains don't view themselves as the bad guys of their own stories. It's practically part of the reason why some villains can be very compelling and complex. While some men want to watch the world burn, others seek to change it, and in those control the world who don't want it to change. And as thus, by that logic, characters become villains for what is essentially Now, while I do enjoy episode 6, there are issues with it when we're talking about villains and motivations, especially when considering the White Rabbit's actions. Part of the reason why I explained the White Rabbit's backstory before this portion of the video and even brought up Adi's interview to explain more of the reasoning for it was to dive into the issues that I have. I think this flashback episode, while done, animated pretty well, and does good storytelling, does a lot of the heavy lifting to establish the White Rabbit's motivations and his own pain that drives him to perform the actions in the show. Visually and emotionally, it's a high point in this series that I have issues with. His pain is palpable, and the imagery sets up a classic tragedy breeds the monster arc. It's meant to explain his hatred of humanity, his loyalty to demons, and his mission to merge the worlds as a twisted liberation. And on paper, it's a solid foundation for a villain with many shades of gray. However, the backstory does all the work of establishing sympathy and motive, but the present-day White Rabbit doesn't earn that sympathy through his actions or evolve his motive into something nuanced. He's static, monologuing about a new age or Sparta's betrayal in ways that don't connect to the vulnerable person that we see. It's like it skips a step or two. And what wasn't helped was the action that we saw before this establishment. I want to focus on stronger points here, so let's look towards episode 3, where the White Rabbit puts a school bus full of children in danger. Innocent kids who had nothing to do with Darkholm, the demon oppression he rails against, or his personal vendetta. When he targets these kids, it's a jarring pivot that clashes with his stated ideals. A victim using children, or innocents in this case, as tools risks undermining the sympathy that his backstory evokes. You wouldn't know this until you watch the backstory, but going back to it, it's something that makes you think. Wait, why'd you do that? Now, to be completely fair, the White Rabbit does this as a means to predict Dante's behavior, anticipating that he will prioritize protecting the bus and its passengers over pursuing them. This is a calculated move to manipulate Dante, using the lives of innocent people as leverage to distract him and further the White Rabbit's plans. Plus, you could easily counter that since he despises humanity, he doesn't really value human life in the same way. Which, fair enough, I suppose, though I would also counter with the fact that he doesn't even hesitate to do this makes me raise an eyebrow. But the bigger issue is him experimenting on his own people and forcing them to hide in an apartment building under the threat of death. And then at the end, he eats one of his own kind to power up. His backstory sets him up as a potentially sympathetic anti-villain driven by the desire to protect the adopted family that he has and that he lost. However, his methods starkly contradict this noble intent and sympathy that is set up. Let's make it clear that the motivation and setup here for the character do work. After all, with Darkholm essentially killing killing his family and massively wounding him, the White Rabbit does have a real good motivation to want to tear down those who hurt him. But it raises me a question. If he's driven by loyalty to demons and hatred of human oppressors, why does he experiment on demons, devour a follower, or target innocent kids? And while the show does call him out on this hypocrisy, it falls flat for a few reasons. Dante explicitly calls out the flaws in his plan, noting that it would harm the weak demons that he claims to want to save, and humans as well. But this fails to develop a critique meaningfully. The White Rabbit's contradictions are acknowledged but not explored or challenged in a way that forces him to reflect or evolve.
We're talking about genocide. If every demon can cross into this world, humans won't stand a chance.
Millions already die. Yes, with the wall gone, the monsters of Makai will come through along with the oppressed.
Alright, so pause here. I don't normally do this sort of thing in videos, but having thought about this for a little bit, the White Rabbit's plan is kinda dumb in retrospect. If the goal is to save the millions who are suffering in the demon world, why would you allow it so the big demons who cause the suffering can come over too? What makes you think that it would just be another generation or two and then change would happen? We're explicitly told that the demons like Mundus and such basically hoard everything good in the demon world. So what's stopping them from doing the same thing in the human world? They can come over, and they'll wreck both worlds in the process. Sorry, that was kind of bugging me, plus I kinda needed to break this up because copyright bullshit. Man, fuck you, Netflix.
That is seriously overreaching.
Hell, even Lady calls him out on this, but
Your brand of pure psychotic ruthlessness? That's all humanity.
On that, we agree.
there's no meaningful aftermath to this. A compelling, hypocritical villain often faces a reckoning that ties their contradictions to their downfall, offering catharsis to the audience. The White Rabbit's arc lacks this payoff. His hypocrisy is pointed out, but not woven into the climactic moment of self-awareness or defeat that feels earned in that regard. It's more like he's giving excuses than realizing that he's become the monster he hated. The other major reason is that the show treats him in the right. There are times when the White Rabbit will expressly point things out, most notably stuff like America, or religion, or the human nature, or blah blah blah.
Americans, the most dependable of your species. Anything that doesn't fit your narrow understanding, you shoot, bomb, or burn without hesitation.
And the show does suggest the White Rabbit is right about humanity's cruelty, which makes the hand-waving of his hypocrisy even more frustrating. The Green Day montage, ugh. Links human greed to war and exploitation, echoing the White Rabbit's accusations. So why even call it his hypocrisy if the narrative agrees with his premise? If humanity is awful, his experiments and attacks could be framed as a warped response to the real problem, giving his arc nuance. He's wrong to harm the people he claims to fight for, and involve innocent folks, but write about the corrupt system of the demon world and how lucky humans got it. You have the grounds to make a fascinating, hypocritical villain. It's as if the writers want to acknowledge his flaws to keep Dante heroic, but didn't want to risk muddying their villain's menace or the show's action vibe. In fact, by validating his view of humanity without engaging with it, the show creates a tonal clash. Netflix's Devil May Cry wants to be a fun, stylish romp, but the White Rabbit's grim worldview and experiments pull it towards heavy drama. Then the writing bails, refusing to wrestle with its implications. Then we come back to the interview I brought up. Like I said at the beginning of this section, there's nothing wrong with relating to a character, hero or villain. But the problem lies with how we're supposed to take the White Rabbit. Are we supposed to agree with him that Darkcom is full of bastards and that the minor demons need to be allowed to live their lives in the human world? Or are we supposed to think that he's lost his way, not realizing that if he tears down the walls of the demon world that Sparta put up, that the greater demons and more beastly kind that basically created the hellscape that his family was from wouldn't take that opportunity to do the same to Earth and basically make his plan moot? Which, you know, is kind of dumb when you think about it. The show clearly wants to put the White Rabbit in the right. Hell, we see that even after Lady who has her heel turned to save the refugee demons, Baines orders that they all be killed. To which the audience knows that the White Rabbit was right to some degree. I think the bigger issue to me is that multiple directions the show wanted to take the character. It wants to spread a message, but undercuts that message by making the White Rabbit doing things that he himself acknowledged hurt his people. But even with that undercutting, we're supposed to believe that he's still in the right because that's what the show is directing us towards. There's something that a lot of people don't understand when it comes to writing, and that's the author is the god of these worlds and characters. They basically can warp anything they want, make the characters say and do what they want. Like, I'm reminded of this Stan Lee clip.
The person who'd win in a fight is the person that the scriptwriter wants to win. If I'm writing a story about the Thing from the Fantastic Four, and he gets into a big fight with Spider-Man, and millions of people out there say, who would win? Well, it depends on who I want to win if I'm writing the script.
That applies to more things than just power scaling. Whoever the writers want to paint as the right for their stories will be in the right. They can choose to handwave any possible counter-arguments or have the characters point things out. But those can just be ignored because, again, the writers can just choose to do that. Now, I'm not saying they can't do this. You're free to write and create anything you want to, but that doesn't mean people will ignore the issues or questions that crop up because of it. You can tell this that in the time that Dante was in the demon world, having a hard time even breathing for air and struggling to move, the White Rabbit chose not to get the blood he needs for his plans, but rather just give Dante a speech and kicks him out of the demon world so he can actually fight back. That to me cemented why I feel this way about the character, because it's really a microcosm of the issues I have with him in his writing. They'd rather spout these big speeches that seem deep but ultimately hurt the actual goal that's being accomplished. I want to make it clear that this sort of thing, where the White Rabbit sacrifices and experiments on people, that isn't the issue I'm having here. It's the fact that his justifications aren't fully explored in the writing, and for a show that really is in your face with its writing choices, it kind of falls flat in that regard. The tonal and writing whiplash are what make it hard for me to fully accept it as good writing. I can see what they're going for, but to me it came off as very messy. That isn't to say you can't do this sort of thing. Hell, if I'm being perfectly honest, a lot of my complaints with the White Rabbit as a villain could have been resolved with a simple exchange between the characters going something like this. I adopted the methods of an enemy willing to do worse. How does your pain justify betraying the people you claim to protect? I may be a monster, but you and Darkcom create monsters all the time, and I am your masterpiece, Lieutenant Arkham. With that, you have acknowledgement that the White Rabbit knows that he's in the wrong for what he's doing, but he's a monster created by the actions of Lady and Darkcom, and puts it squarely on the shoulders of them and not humanity as a whole. I'll explain why in my next section, why I have an issue with that whole
I should have known you were human from the start. Your brand of pure psychotic ruthlessness? That's all humanity.
But I want to make a comparison in this chapter. Now look, I got a bit of an obsession with Kamen Rider Gav, but it's a series that I've honestly loved for quite a while. It's got some really good stuff in it. And there's a character in the series that I think is an interesting one to compare since he has a similar track record as a villain, and that would be Suga. Otherwise known as Kamen Rider Bait. Suga is a scientist who experiments on people, most notably the secondary writer Honto, to the point of implanting an organ from the series monsters, Granutes, to empower him to transform and fight other Granutes. We're talking back alley doctoring without anesthesia and implanting an alien organ into the guy.
できるかな。おいおいおいおい。本当にこんなとこでやって大丈夫なのかよ。ああ、局所麻酔だからちょっと痛いかもね。はは。おい、それどういう意味だよ。それじゃ張り切って参りましょう。マジかよ。
Throughout the series, we're shown that Suga is an interesting character, more or less just wanting to experiment with what he's got, and he's willing to play both sides in the ongoing conflict, even working with one of the major antagonists in order to get things such as the Granute organs or even research. The guy was shady, and I'm not just saying that because he's portrayed by the same guy who voiced Crow. Of course, when things start getting a little weird, such as there being evil clones appearing of the main writer, Gav, we're shown that Suga is the one behind it. Turns out his goal is to make the ultimate life form. I mean, that's no Shadow the Hedgehog, but I can see the potential in that. Now, you may be wondering why I'm bringing up Suga in a video about the White Rabbit, and that's because in order to get this far with his research, Suga had to make some sacrifices. As it turns out, Suga had sacrificed at least 8 people or more over the course of 20 years so he could advance his research to this point. And like the White Rabbit, he does experiments on people for his cause, which ultimately resulted in their deaths. And that's not counting things like having people being bait for those guinea pigs, much like how he orchestrated Honto's boss, who was a father to him, to be killed and push Honto to become a test subject. And what's Suga's motivation for this? Well, I will admit this is a weakness in the writing, but it's not fully explored. But it stems from him losing a young child years ago. Whether it's his son or a family member, it's up to interpretation of the audience. But the main point is that this kid died, and ever since then, Suga viewed humanity as fragile and weak, with its experiments focused on making humans stronger and more resilient. Now the question is, why do I make this comparison? Well, it's to point out that I believe a character who has sacrificing other people or such for you need to have cohesion with the character. The White Rabbit wanted to make the lesser demons, who couldn't even survive on their own world, come to ours, and Suga wanted to make humanity stronger and more resilient. I think it should be noted that both these characters are human, but have parts of monsters in them of their respective series. The White Rabbit has demon blood, and in order to transform into Kamen Rider Bake, Suga needed a granute organ transplant. Both are technologically savvy in their respective series, and both are deceiving characters. They have goals that can be somewhat considered noble, but at some point they went over the edge and crossed lines that should not have been crossed.
俺はやったんだよ。
1、2、3、あれだから8人か。いや、もうちょいいたな。
それって今まで人間は。
これは20年以上に及ぶ研究の成果。
そんな長い間たくさんの人を犠牲にして。
ってよ、平然となんてしてないって。実験台のみんなには心から感謝してるよ。
The difference here to me is that Suga embraces his horrid actions without making excuses.
I reject my humanity!
Hell, he's actually grateful of those he sacrificed, and his mindset of sacrificing others must be made for his goals in line with it. Meanwhile, the White Rabbit chalks up his sacrifices as the pain he inflicted on his people. He felt the same way, and ultimately, as we've gone over, despite his horrible actions, he was in the right about humanity. At least that's how the series portrays it, and it doesn't really explore it as contradictions. Unlike the White Rabbit, who claims to oppose oppression but mirrors it, Suga never postures as a savior. He's upfront about his self-interest, and I think that what makes him a much more appealing villain to me. Yeah, he hides the truth of what he's doing, but he's not acting like a savior with a noble cause. He's acting like a mad scientist and embraces the sacrifice that he made. It's cleared and it isn't muddied. To me, the White Rabbit's writing stumbles over unclear motives and wasted potential. Suga stays on track by never pretending to be anything he's not. He's just a scientist chasing an immoral dream. Of course, I'm not saying Suga is a perfect villain or even a good counterexample to a T. His backstory isn't fully explored like the White Rabbit's, and Suga lacks a lot of development. Hell, it's possible that the potential that he had as a villain is undercooked, since at this point, he's dead!
本当に。まあ、あとは僕に任せてよ。
Both characters have their issues in their writing to me. However, I feel Suga pulls this kind of villain off better than the White Rabbit in terms of consistency and world integration. His motivations don't contradict his actions, and avoids the White Rabbit's pitfalls of tonal dissonance and shallow hypocrisy, but writing doesn't fully capitalize on the emotional complexity that would elevate him to be a standout tragic villain. Suga is a villain who balances tragedy and menace without tipping over their own contradictions or having to need the story to validate him. At least that's my interpretation of things. When I dropped my video on the show, I knew I would get one sort of defense that I utterly hate when it comes to adaptations. The game's stories were never that great.
Said it. The price to pay for power?
I've never been a fan of this mentality, especially when I see it in my comment sections. It's an attempt to excuse people's issues who are fans of the games in order to prop up the material that's being produced now, especially since we're talking about the core elements of the games that are essentially being flipped on their head and actively contradicting the whole point of the series' narrative. I am branching out a little bit from focusing on the White Rabbit with this chapter, but it's necessary since it's emblematic of my issues with the Netflix adaptation doing its own thing and the whole idea of
I should have known you were human from the start. Your brand of pure psychotic ruthlessness? That's all humanity.
And how that goes against the core ideas of Devil May Cry itself. But to do that, we need to talk about Sparta, the in-game version, not the Netflix version that seems to think it's a good idea to basically have Lady do this to the guy.
Sparta's the one hell dweller who might be worth not vaporizing on sight. He was a demon knight, whatever that means. Big bad warrior, blah, blah, blah.
Gives us the right to say what we want.
Shut
when
the
you think about
fuck
it.
up!
Sparta, being a demon who fought against his very nature, joining the humans and even falling in love with a human, is at the core of the game's themes. Sparta's decision to reject Mundus' tyranny, protect humanity, and fall in love with Eva is portrayed as an extraordinary defiance of his kind's selfish, power-hungry instincts. This is a cornerstone of the game's narratives, embodying the core theme of humanity triumphing over inherent cruelty. Sparta's choice to embrace compassion and sacrifice, sealing the demon world at great personal cost, is rare, making him a legendary figure whose legacy shapes Dante's and later Nero's struggles to balance their own human and demonic sides. The rarity of which a demon does this underscores the game's narrative. Humanity, defined by love, empathy, and moral choice, is a hard-won virtue that sets Sparta apart from his nature and drives the series' emotional depths. It's why when we get a line like this at the end of the first game,
Dante,
Trish, devils never cry. These tears are a gift only humans have.
Awkward delivery aside in the dated graphics, the point of the series, even with the name of it, Devil May Cry, is to showcase that. The name originates from moments of profound vulnerability, such as Dante's tears for Trish in DMC1, where he declares devils never cry, only to weep when she sacrifices herself, proving his human heart. Trish, a demon created by the big bad of the first game, Mundus, to mimic Eva, evolves beyond her origins, developing genuine care for Dante and humanity. This transformation highlights the series' narrative. Humanity isn't just bloodline, but a choice to feel, connect, and protect, a rare among demons and hard-won for half-demons. It's why when we see humans who are the bad guys in these games like Arkham or Sanctus, they're people who are throwing away their humanity, deliberately casting aside what makes them strong, empathy, morality, and connection, in pursuit of demonic power, making them some of the series' most despicable antagonists. The series isn't that humanity is bad, it's the opposite. Hell, there's this line from DMC4.
You surrendered your humanity. It's that simple.
But you are not human, so why am I inferior?
You assume humans are weak. Okay, yeah, their bodies lack the physical ability of a demon. But humans possess something that demons don't.
And while Dante doesn't answer Agnes here, anyone who actually cares about the games and pays attention to their stories will know it's stuff like love, loyalty, sacrifice, elements that Dante, Trish, and Nero, who embrace their human sides despite their demonic blood, have. To be frank, humanity isn't blood, it's a choice. It's not given, but earned. Cherishing humanity redeems, while forsaking it corrupts, regardless of one's nature. Can you tell that I enjoy this series? Because I really do. In comparison to the Netflix version, the inclusion of the demon refugees and the White Rabbit undermines this core element by portraying demons as broadly empathetic, capable of love and community without the arduous choice the games emphasize. The series suggests that human-like emotions are commonplace and not a rare triumph. The Netflix series introduced human villains like Darkholm's leader Bane, who hunts down demons but lacks the nuanced descent into inhumanity as seen in Arkham or Sanctus. Their prejudice against demons is framed as a generic humans fear what they don't understand trope, not a deliberate rejection of empathy or morality. The White Rabbit's motivations, driven by human-born trauma rather than demonic nature, don't engage with the struggle of overcoming demonic instincts to cry as a human might. The namesake itself is referenced only superficially, tied to Dante's agency without its emotional resonance that the series established prior. And that, to me, is why I feel the White Rabbit and Netflix DMC is so divisive. Yeah, the in-your-face politics are a major turnoff to a lot of people, and people dismissing others who dislike it as chudge certainly isn't helping this at all. But in reality, people who argue that the core of Devil May Cry isn't in this show, or more or less coming from this as a means of it, ignores the basis of the original series. At least that's how I view it. I certainly can't or won't speak for others, even if I have a big number next to my name, but this is how I feel. The series on Netflix is just the antithesis of the original games. Regardless of all that, this is why I feel such a disconnect with the show and even the character of the White Rabbit. I'm fine with it doing its own thing, though I do have my own gripes with it. Obviously. You guys have probably seen my review on the show, you know that's the case. To me, while I'm not a fan of the choices of the Netflix version, I'm not gonna say it's a full-on garbage fire. Honestly, I take more issue with people using the show as a political tool to slam against others, clearly showing they don't have any actual love for the core series. I'm fine that the Netflix show exists. It's not my pleasant cup of tea, and if you like it, that's fine. But The White Rabbit is a symbol of the issues that I have with the adaptation as a whole. To me, it really comes off as people don't really know the series and don't want to actually observe the games outside the surface level glance and the memes. So to those people, I have one thing to say.
If you're gonna continue your research in the next world, do your homework first.
Of course, this is all just my opinion on the matter, and if you disagree, that's fine. That being said, I'm MangaKamen, and...
In the end, we're all satisfied.